So I'm Don Dreif. I'm the botanist for this happy little group. And Bob Muller is the naturalist, and he's our fish guy. Though we don't utilize his fish expertise much in the parks. I think we've had one species dumped in the pond at Tenhave over the years that he had to identify. But Bob is one of the better all around naturalists I know. And so he's a generalist. He specializes in fish, but he has just a general knowledge of plants and insects and birds. And as we often say, we know enough to get in trouble. So I will let you go, Bob.
Thank you. And again, I think we didn't mention this is a program of the Royal Oak Nature Society. So, okay, up there, native fish are hidden wildlife. And I refer to them this way because nature people know all these things. But if you don't stick your head underwater, or it's big enough to catch on hook and line, you've never seen these fish. If some of these things are so colorful that if they were a butterfly or a bird, every second grader would know its name, and nobody knows they exist. Native fish are hidden wildlife. I've met people that have been, they're senior citizens. They've been into nature since they were little kids. They don't know anything about the fish. They know everything there is to know about wildflowers and butterflies and birds, but fish, they don't know. If you don't catch it on hook and line, you don't see it. Now, what I've been doing for the last 8 years has really helped us learn is we've been sampling the Rouge River, local Detroit River. Henry Ford had his Rouge plant on it for the community of fishes, or over 60,000 fish that we've known personally. I'm the kid who didn't grow up. Everybody at 10 jumped in the river and caught stuff. I haven't stopped. This has just been a passion in life, and it's never gone away. We sample fish in the Rouge to give us a data point over time as to what's happening in the fish community. You're looking at the health of the river. Fish that live here can also tell us something about that. Aquatic diversity is really important. You have maybe 18 species of fish right here in this river with me. They all interact with each other. They all evolve with each other. Some eat others, some use others' nests for breeding. Anytime that you take even one group out, you could affect the entire population. Invasive species are animals that have come from somewhere else in the world. We brought them here one way or another, maybe on purpose, maybe accidentally. And they usually are harming native species. They outcompete, they eat them, they do something that causes a problem. Since the invasive species can come in and eliminate somebody, you don't know what that effect is going to be on the entire ecosystem. It could cause a major collapse. It could be affecting human health. It could be affecting economics. It could simply be that you love the outdoors and you love what's here. And therefore, on an aesthetic level, on a personal level, it has just damaged your view of the world when something has gone away. Okay, the Rouge River is a really interesting river because you see that thing that says Lake Plain. The area of Metro Detroit, much of it was underneath the predecessor of Lake Erie that was much larger. And it's a real good clay-based area. The moraine line there, the moraines are where the ice age or the glaciers dumped a ridge of cobble and dirt. Above that moraine line, the Rouge has got some pretty clear running streams. Below it, it tends to pick up all the clay that's on the bottom and become very cloudy, or turbid as it's used in that. Now, I have lost all of, let's see, maybe I can. I've lost all of that because all the pictures of the participants are there, but okay, 1.35 million people in the Rouge. Industry, Henry Ford's Rouge plant, tremendous amount of pollution over the years. What's the word underneath 1.35 million people, somebody? Don? Don?
Flashy.
Flashy, okay. Most of this area is concrete because it's houses and roads. So everything that rains and hits the road runs into the river. CSOs, those are combined sewer sanitary outflows. So in the old days, when you flushed your toilet, it went straight in the river. Today, if the sewage treatment plant can't handle the rain, then you dump it in the river. Down cutting. Now, down cutting is an effect. Normally, that V that you see is how down cutting, everybody I think has seen a hillside with all the little V's from water running off it that are cut. And normally, when fast extra water dumped in a river down cuts, the sides cave in and slump. That's how you get the V. If you look at those two photos, we got a good clay substrate. We get straight walls, 6, 7 feet high in a lot of areas on the Rouge, which means that the river has to rise 6 feet before it can overflow into its floodplain. Philip, the guy at the bottom, is about 6 foot. So he's up to his knees in the water and his hands over his head. That bank's at least 6 foot. We regularly are using those roots like steps on a ladder to climb down to get into the river. I tend to not jump off the edge anymore. There are about 139 different species of fish in Michigan. Metro Detroit's 3 rivers. The Clinton River has 95, the Rouge River has 65, the Huron River has 100. We probably always had a few less fish species because the other 2 rivers are not turbid, cloudy, and that cloudiness in the water affects some fish that can't live there. And, you know, it's an urban river. We can get some pretty strange places to drag our nets. Again, showing, because that a line above the moraines can be clear running water, and the line below, at least after a rain, is going to be very coffee and cream looking. That fish, a northern red-bellied dace, you'll notice is basically only found above that moraine line. We had one little spot on the upper Rouge that it's into the lake plain area, but that's one of the cleanest running rivers of all the sections of the Rouge. So maybe it's cleaning up a little, but it was just into that lake plain. This was the crew that we had last year during the pandemic and having to sample with masks on. And this is a spot on the Rouge that is really altered. It's concrete bottom that runs from Michigan Avenue to just above the Ford Rouge plant. There's an oxbow that has been reconnected. This is at Greenfield Village. And you know, we've sampled there to see what we're getting, and it's amazing what we're finding in the oxbow. I would imagine some fish coming up from the Detroit River, swimming through that concrete jungle, and all of a sudden can make a right turn and be into a almost natural piece of river for a while. Nets are dragged here. Of course, this was an advantage here. You're dragging the lead line on the bottom of the net along the bottom, and you can just drag it right up on the cement. There's another method. They can't get into that brush. So Jared's trying to scare the fish out of the sticks and shrubs and stuff back into the net. So that's one of the techniques that we use. And there's another one in a shallower stream. And I think there's a couple little fish flopping in there. Just some little guys. And this one isn't a video, but deeper, faster water. At the end of our sampling, we keep every fish in the buckets that we've sampled. We've then got to measure and ID every one of them and record the information. And again, in 8 years, we've done over 60,000 fish this way. Now, the other thing that goes on is you got tolerant and intolerant fish. A tolerant fish can handle really nasty water. An intolerant fish has to have pretty clean water or certain conditions or it can't survive. Now, 65 species of fish are found in the Rouge. 16 species are intolerant, but it's only 4% of the fish community. 14 species are tolerant, but they represent 61%. So you can see that even though we have a lot of intolerant species, we don't have many of them. And that map shows where we've sampled. All the black dots and the red squares are where we sampled. The red squares are where a particular fish was found. This is where we found intolerant fish. So even into the bad sections of the river today, we're finding some intolerant fish, which means the water must be improving. Minnows. We're going to mainly try to talk about fish that aren't the game fish. Those are the ones you see on hook and line. Out of those 139 fish from Michigan, maybe 25, maybe 20 are caught on hook and line. The rest of them are invisible to us. And minnows in general, that's a huge family of fish, are not small fish, they're a family. That's a carp, it's a minnow, and it's certainly not a small fish. So minnows are the largest family of freshwater fish on Earth. They're the largest family of freshwater fish in North America. They're the largest family of freshwater fish in Michigan. I think you can see the trend. And in Michigan, 40% or 40 species, 28% are minnows. And you can see the same percentage in the Clinton, the Rouge, and the Huron, the three rivers of Detroit. So somewhere between 25 and 30% of all the fish we have in the state are minnows. And goldfish are also minnows, and people have let them go over the years, so we occasionally sample some really bright colored fish. This is a fish called a red-side dace, really neat fish. It's endangered in Michigan. It's endangered in Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Ontario, New York. In Ohio, you can use them for bait. There's a lot of them, but their particular habitat, it's a cool water species, not as cold as what a trout needs, but cooler than most of our rivers. Water in the 70s for very long had killed this guy. But even the Rouge, because a lot of it's spring fed, can be as low as 65 degrees in August or October. Both male and female color up, but look at the size of the mouth on this guy. He's about 4 inches long, but you could put the end of your finger in his mouth. It is the only minnow we have that goes airborne to catch flying insects. So really beautiful fish. There's another one, another minnow. This guy maybe 5 or 6 inches long. It's called a stone roller, central stone roller. It's got breeding tubercles. This is a male colored up to impress the ladies. You can see the little growths on his head and all down his body. They're sort of rough, horny growths that male minnows tend to get in the spring. Named stone roller, he makes a nest. The male picks up a pebble at a time until he has a pile, maybe a foot in diameter and 6, 7 inches high. And that's a pile of stones that the water can flow through, no silt. And when they lay their eggs, the eggs fall between the pebbles, the water flows through, still giving oxygen, and they're protected. He has cartilage lips, and if you run your fingers on his lips, they're really rough because he scrapes algae off rocks. That's the food that he eats. Sometimes a lot of other minnows other species will spawn on top of one of these nests. They've learned over time in evolution that you can wait for these guys to build nests if the river isn't real clean and you've got a good spot to spawn. I've seen 200 or 300 little minnows spawning on top of one of these nests. And they used to think of those as parasites, but they're not. They're nest associates is the term today. And if you think about it, he builds the nest, he waits for a lady to come along to spawn and add some eggs. He keeps doing this over time. And in between the lady showing up, he's over hiding along the edge of the bank. And there's 100 little minnows spawning on his nest, and the great blue heron comes along. Who does it eat? Not him. So, he benefits from having all these other fish using his nest. You can see from the map, he's found pretty much everywhere in the Rouge. These are two other fish that are tolerant, so they can take bad water. That's a creek chub at the top and a common shiner. Both of them are nest builders. Now, sometimes the intolerant fish can have a lot of value because other fish will sometimes spawn on their nest that need clean gravel. And in a silty river like the Rouge, it's rare to have that clean gravel because the silt is filled in between the pebbles, and these guys clean up a spot. It's another one, a horny head chub. You can see all the tubercles on his head, and that's that's his nest, both an underwater shot and looking down on it. He makes a nice little pile. They were only found, the horny head chub, in one single site on the river out of the 120 some odd sites that we've sampled. And it's between two dams on the river, and why it's disappeared everywhere else in the Rouge, but that one stretch. And there's lots there. I think when we sampled, we caught, 20 or 30. It was not just one or two. So this guy's a black-nosed dace. Now, he can take some pretty bad water, but he has to have clean gravel to spawn. So he's probably using those creek chub and stone roller and common shiner nests to have a place to breed. The male's got that orange stripe because he's trying to impress the ladies. That's the lady down in the lower right-hand corner. You can see she's filled with a lot of eggs, and that's the normal coloration, is just a dark stripe. And you can see all the tubercles on the head of the males. But pretty fish. I like this one in aquariums, really nice fish. Northern red-bellied dace, a good name, but sometimes they turn lemon yellow instead of red. And this guy only up in those headwater streams. And it's funny, we can sample those areas all summer and not see any. And then if you hit the right point, you're going to drag a net in one of these little creeks you can jump across and get 70, 80, 100 in one net pull. And then they seem to be gone for the year. I'm not sure exactly how they spread out or whatever happens, but beautiful little guys. This is one of the rarest fish in the Great Lakes region, period. It's a pug-nosed shiner. Look at that vertical mouth and the blow up of the face. And we found them in one lake, Upper Long Lake on the Rouge. They were found back in 1906, 1907 in a few lakes. And here we found them again. They hadn't been sampled since the 1900s. So 100 years later. And the first time we got it, we got one. And, we got real excited about that because it's rare. It's hard to see, by the way, this fish is the size of your little finger, maybe a little shorter. So to see that vertical mouth on that little tiny fish is a little bit hard, but you notice how the scales on his back have got nice dark edges around them. It's a good field mark because that's easy to spot. And in fact, whoops, that was the last time we sampled where we got about 20 or 30 of them. And you can see those dark scales on the back, but it's hard to see. This was an aquarium right there at Streamside. Being endangered, we got to put these guys back. So that was a really neat find to find in the Rouge and to find it 100 years after they'd been sampled in those lakes. We actually think they're more common, but we think that most of the methods people use to collect fish aren't the best method to catch this guy. And since we only know when we pull up the net, what we've got in it, you don't know what you might be doing that, is missing somebody. Another neat minnow, one of my favorites, spot fin shiners. Several different names. You saw northern, or was it? Yeah, well, dace. We've had dace, we've had shiners, we've had chubs. If you're a dace, your scales are really small and you look velvety. If you're a shiner, generally you have large mirror-like scales. And if you're a chub, you have large scales that are dull. Now this guy isn't as shiny as a mirror. When you catch him, it's a real satin look to his scales. It's almost a good field mark when we see him flopping in the net. The males get the yellow fins, and those are two males that are sparring. They will dance and show off to each other all summer long. So they breed for a long period of time. They were referred to once as the fish that spawn in trees. They're a crevice spawner. And when a tree falls and the bark starts to split off the tree, it makes a crevice. And they will be injecting eggs in places like that, or under a rock or whatever. In the Rouge, since we have almost no rocks and it's silty, I would expect that all of it's in pieces of wood where the bark is peeling away. Something actually called a minnow. That's a minnow. These two guys are not real particularly showy. They're both tolerant fish. They can take some of the worst water in the river. The fathead minnow on the bottom can take really bad water. The blunt nose likes water just a little bit cleaner. So when we get a lot more blunt nose than fatheads, we know we're probably in a slightly better spot on the river. You can see the tubercles on them. But the neat thing with these guys that still makes them sort of an interesting, even though they're not too colorful, is most minnows scatter their eggs on the bottom. These guys, under a structure like a log or a lily pad or a board or a rock, lay the eggs on the ceiling. Silt doesn't settle on the ceiling, therefore nothing smothers their eggs. Because of that, when we get really bad water, there's times we've sampled 400 fish and over 300 of them are fathead minnows, which is rather annoying when you're having to count everyone and measure them. But neat that they do that and they guard the eggs. This happened in an aquarium, and I wanted to get photos. So I pulled the rock out of the aquarium, carried it to my backyard, filled it with water, and put the rock back in, caught the male, threw him in, and he immediately simply went under the rock and started guarding the eggs. So he was a really good dad, because that was enough that I would almost expect that he was going to start eating the eggs or something with all that jockeying around. And when I returned it to the tank in my basement, he just immediately got right there and took care of the eggs. Suckers, another group of fish, closely related to minnows, but different. And except for one species, they're all found in North America. They seem to have come from Asia, but they exploded here as far as different types. People used to fish a lot for suckers, and I know people still do, not as many. They like to smoke them. Some of them make big runs up the river. So with a dip net or something back, 40, 50, 60, 70 years ago, you could have got hundreds of pounds of suckers to smoke and therefore preserve. I've got a couple of friends that fish for suckers, and we were out trying to get photographs of big ones. This guy's about 2 foot long. It's a common sucker. You can see the lips, the pattern, and all those little bumps on their lips. They're like our fingertips. Those are for nerve endings. Our fingerprints are, so those ridges allow us to have real good tactile feel. Well, in reality, this guy is sort of viewing the world through the feeling of his lips because he's working the bottom, looking for food, looking for things. There's another sucker.
It's going okay. Oh, I'm petting the hog sucker.
Yeah, see, I can even pet fish. So not everybody that can do that. Catfish, we've got a number of different kinds of catfish here. Bullheads, we got yellow and brown and black bullheads. We've got channel cat. The bullheads on the bottom, you notice that little lump towards its tail. It's called an adipose fin. An adipose means fat, so it's a fat fin. And the one on the top is a stone roller, which is intolerant. And it's one of the mad toms, the dwarf catfish. And you'll notice his adipose fin, though, runs into the tail, which is a great way to tell these apart because a lot of times we're catching very small ones, not something that's a foot long. Most of the mad toms are not much bigger than your thumb. The stone cat can get about 6, 7 inches long. But the mad toms are sort of interesting. If you've ever grabbed a catfish in your life, they've got big spines. They stick in you, it really hurts. First one I ever saw, I grabbed when I was a little kid. I've never grabbed one since. The mad toms, though, not only do they have the spines, but they've got a toxin. And I've talked to people who have grabbed them and their arm has gone numb to the shoulder for several hours. So a little bit nasty. Now, the surprising thing is I've heard that mad toms are great bass bait. So first, I'm not sure how you hold on to the guy without getting spawned to put a hook in him. And second, I'm not sure how the heck the bass ever grabs this thing in his mouth and swallows it. But we've got about, in Michigan, I think there's 4 different mad toms, maybe 5. In the Rouge, we've got tadpole mad toms and these stone cats in some very local places. There's 4 different kinds of fish, just sort of a mix. 2 of those guys are invasive. The Western Gambusi and the Mumachug are both North American fish, but not from Michigan. The Gambusi is a live bearer like guppies. It's from down south. They're also called mosquito fish. And everybody believed that these things ate mosquitoes. So they've been spread around the world for mosquito control. And what they generally do is eliminate one of your local fish that used to eat mosquitoes. And these guys don't eat that many. So it's become a terrible invasive other places. We had a population here for about 5 years, but back in the 40s, the Toledo sewage treatment people dumped them into the Maumee. And I really think what we had enough of the right kind of years that they'd made it that 60 miles north from Ohio. And we were getting a great number in the fall. And then the last 2 years, we've gotten none. The Mumachug is a salt marsh killifish from the East Coast. They're used as bait. I think somehow he got brought home in a bucket and dumped in the creek behind somebody's house. Well, we found those, contacted the DNR, and they managed to eliminate them. So we might be one of the few groups that's ever found an invasive and managed to have it gotten rid of. Um, Upper right hand is a stickleback. It's a brook stickleback. They're native. Little spines all over the back. They're about, inch and a half long. And the male builds a nest of plant material, lures the female in to lay the eggs, and then guards them. The one on the bottom, a brook silverside. Silversides are a real common group of saltwater fish, but there's a few found in freshwater. And they cruise in schools right at the surface and can just jump when you're coming along with the net. And they're, maybe 2.5 inches long. This is one of my favorite fish. It's called a mud minnow. It's not a minnow. All minnows, by the way, have to have a forked tail. You'll notice his tail is certainly not forked. And that one close-up of the anal fin in the lower part of the screen, that iridescence is the male's color trying to impress some females in the spring. Unlike most fish that somebody guards the eggs, it's usually dad that guards the eggs. In mud minnows, it's the female, which I found strange. I think it's the only one we've got that works in reverse. They're an extremely tolerant fish. I think they have the lowest oxygen requirement of any fish in North America. So you can get a really muddy, nasty, terrible area. Not the chemical bad stuff, but that kind of thing, to where there's just no dissolved oxygen in the water, and they're liable to be able to survive. They're related to pike. And if you got one that's 5 inches, 6 inches long, you got one that you should mount on the wall. Mottled sculpins, another family of mostly saltwater fish, but a number of freshwater ones. This is an intolerant fish, and it has to have cold water. The water gets about 70 degrees, it starts killing these guys. And so the few places in the Rouge that have these are way upstream where the water is cool and where the water is really clear and crystal and good condition. Only a face the mother could love, I think, like a big toad head with these huge pectoral fins on their sides, but neat little fish. Now we'll get into a group that some of them are game fish. Some of them people may be familiar. I threw those in because the sunfish family, a group of only North American fish. Most people don't think of largemouth bass and smallmouth bass as sunfish, but they are. We think of the little panfish as sunfish. But they're also in that same family. And also rock bass, got that real red eye. And the juveniles have a really neat pattern. They get sort of dull when they get to be adults. And all the sunfish, the bass to the bluegills to everybody, make these nests. The males take their pectoral fins and they fan, and you can see just move the stuff away. He didn't pile up those rocks. He got the lighter materials to move away by beating his fins. The male guards them. He lures females in to spawn, and then he sits there and guards those eggs. I once was at a spot where there was camping with the scouts. There was a canoe landing, and every half hour, 20 canoes came in and dragged their aluminum canoes up, and there was a little sunfish with a nest. And they 20 people stampeded and dragged their canoes right through where his little nest was. And 15 minutes after they were gone, he's back on the nest guarding the eggs. And I watched that all day. So it was amazing how, that instinct to do that was there. Here's some of the different, the common sunfish around here. Green sunfish at the top is really small, doesn't get very big. And you'll notice his mouth is really big. Fishermen, I think, dislike this guy because you don't want to catch a bunch of 3-inch fish. You wanted to catch bigger ones, and he can get the hook and the worm in his mouth. If you'll notice, the other three, the pumpkin seed, the bluegill, and the northern, all have quite small mouths. So, you'll catch the green sunfish like this, and the other guys will have to be this big to be able to take the same worm. So, neat patterns on them. The northern sunfish, obviously, incredibly colorful, beautiful animal. The pumpkin seed tends to have a little bit of speckles in its body and a little red dot on that, oftentimes referred to as an ear, a little dark spot. The bluegill has some bars and a little black spot at the back of his dorsal fin, but not a lot of color. Bluegill gets the biggest. The northern sunfish is about 6 inches maximum, pumpkin seed sort of in between. But lots of people catch these kind of guys and at least see them. The interesting thing is they hybridize, and they hybridize in degraded river systems more. And it's my personal opinion. I've never read any proof on this, but I think what happens is in a normal, rich ecosystem, each one of those species likes a slightly different area to build their nest. Maybe the water's a little deeper. Maybe it's got more plants, something just a little different. But when the area degrades, you've got all these species spawning within 6 inches of each other. And this is external fertilization. So the eggs are laid and sperm is sprayed in the water. I don't think the green sunfish thought the northern sunfish lady looked better. I think it was just he was breeding right next to him, and a little bit of that stuff drifted over and fertilized some of those eggs. The one on the bottom is a hybrid between a pumpkin seed and a northern sunfish. My favorite group of fish, darters. I love darters. Only North America, only east of the Rockies. Some of the most colorful freshwater fish on earth. I think there's 200 and some odd kinds of darters in North America today. We got about a dozen in Michigan. The guy at the top, a rainbow darter, is about the size of your thumb. The one at the bottom, an Iowa darter, is about the size of your little finger. Both of them are males that are dressed up to impress the ladies. Fish, by the way, have color vision. You wouldn't be doing this if you only saw in black and white. This is a Johnny darter, not real colorful, and that's a male. That darkness in the fins are what he's impressing the ladies with. And one of the field marks are, it's almost like a little W's or M's on those dark lines around the scales. He breeds under a rock on the ceiling again. So he doesn't need clean water. Most of the darters do. He can be in some real cloudy water. And again, dust doesn't settle on the ceiling, so it's not settling on your eggs. And there's a rock we'd picked up with some of the darter eggs on it. And you'll notice that it's found all over the Rouge, everywhere. Now, there's the rainbow darter, and you'll notice it's only found in those upwater clear streams. But beautiful, beautiful fish. It's interesting that they breed in riffles where the gravel, little fast water is going over it, and there's lots of clean gravel. And some males will stay on the riffles all winter when it could freeze there. So there's a chance you don't make it to spring. And the juveniles and the females always go to deep water. But if the male can stay alive on the riffle, when spring comes, he's already staked out the best territory there is to breed. And a male that was going to make sure he lived through the winter can't necessarily find the good spot. So it's interesting interactions between these animals. Two different fish, same kind. Colors vary a lot. All the red in a fish is from diet. First time we sampled a particular place on the Clinton River, the rainbow darters didn't have an ounce of orange or red, only blue. And we thought we had a color morph. And every year since then, when we've gone back, they've got the red. So that first year we went there must have been something the summer before lacking in the diet. And there was no red in the fish. There's an Iowa darter again, a male at the top. You can see where we find those. They tend to like lakes. They like weedy areas, don't have a lot of aquatic plants in the Rouge. The one on the bottom is a least darter. Inch and a quarter long, full growing. That orange is this guy's trying to show off for the ladies. It's the smallest vertebrae in in Michigan, smallest vertebrae in Michigan. And again, we found those in little lakes and ponds along the Rouge, maybe downstream a little bit out of it. Both of these fish tend to be found together, but in spawning them in captivity, they like different areas to spawn. So they're never really breeding right next to each other. Black-side darter. Now this is a guy that, he still likes good water. He's not a tolerant fish, but they like turbid water. And if you look where we find them, they're not found any of the places above that moraine where there's good clear water all the time. They're only found down where there's some cloudiness. The one on the bottom is a fish called a dusky darter. And Philip, my partner in doing the sampling in the Rouge, we had heard that these were in tributaries of the Maumee in Michigan, and they weren't supposed to be found in Michigan. So we went down back, I think it was 2013, and within 30 minutes we caught some, and then we drove down 20 miles to another tributary coming up from the Maumee, and we found some more. So Those were the first ones ever found in the state. I'll never get to describe a fish for science, but at least I found a new fish for my state. So it was sort of fun. Key characteristic is, if you look at the black-side darter, there's a black line under the eye that's referred to as a teardrop. Duskies don't have that. There's just a couple dots on the tail of the black side, but there's a series of them on the tail of the dusky darter. Those were sort of field marks when you were catching the fish. Another darter called a log perch. It's been moving up the Rouge. So we were catching them only down near the Detroit River end when we started, and now we're finding them 7-8 miles upstream. And we were finding maybe 1 or 2 a year 10 years ago. Sometimes we've gotten 7 or 8 or 9 at one site last year. So for whatever reason, this guy has moved into the river. They can't get further north than that lower Rouge because there's still a dam at Henry Ford's Fairlane Mansion. Although they built a fish passage around it, but it's not quite fixed yet. So they may move into the whole system, but there's been a blockage for years that prevented anybody coming up from the Detroit River to get any further than that bottom branch. Now, the sort of evil guy we work with, round goby is a fish that came in probably with the zebra mussels, same part of the world it came from. It's one of the most common fish in the Great Lakes today. It can really displace a lot of native fish, including the darters, because it's just sort of ferocious. The one on the bottom's a male that gets really dark when he's breeding. One on the top's a female. And again, they breed under a rock and a cluster of eggs and guard them. And I told somebody once that gobies have egg-shaped eggs, and they looked at me strange, and I had to, think about that a minute. I work with a lot of fish eggs. They're all round, they're spheres. This guy, I guess, I should have said it's like a hen's egg shape, but just saying egg shape, boy, I got some really weird looks on that. But there's some of see the fish starting to form in the eggs. I think that's the last. Yep, back to, the Rouge can look real pretty. It's got a long way to go to be a perfect river. And with all those millions of people living in the watershed, it's going to be never a trout stream. But amazing animals living right below the surface that nobody sees and nobody knows about. And you got to be crazy enough to jump in a river and drag nets to see them. Don talked about this at the beginning, but second Tuesday in July, we'll have a Zoom program on fern identification. And on Saturday, July 17th, we will have a fern walk. I guess I wouldn't call it a nature walk, where we talk about what we could find. So thank you very much. I guess, Don, if there's any way we could ask people if they want to unmute and ask a question, unless you received any.
There's a question in the chat and a comment in the chat. So the question is, are tubercles normal, or is it an effect of the poor water quality?
No, they're normal. In fact, I believe it's material like your fingernails, like the scales of a fish. And the patterns are unique. There are fish you could actually ID the species by the pattern of the tubercles. Some of the suckers get tubercles on their fins instead of on their head and body, but it's a normal type thing. And they're pretty rough. When you pick up one of those fish, it's like sandpaper on that fish.
And then Fritz made a comment. I don't know if he wants to unmute himself and add.
Well, I think I have, haven't I?
Oh, there you go.
Okay. Just let people know who I am. I am on the board of directors of the Native Fishes Association that Bob mentioned earlier, and he did a fantastic job. He's our representative for Michigan, and he's spot on with everything he said tonight. So great job, Bob.
Thank you, Fred.
So did the Native people, the Native Americans, have any use for the small fish besides food?
Probably not besides food, but if you look worldwide, if you've got a net and you can drag it through the lake or the river and come up with 100 fish that are the size of your thumb, you got enough protein for a family of 10. You'll probably throw them in a pot and make a stew. It's only people in the sort of developed countries that all of a sudden get into this hook and line, and I want to catch the big fish. If you were just trying to make sure you could eat, it would be a whole lot less effort to either have a trap or drag a net and have all that protein come up. You know, so worldwide, these things are also important oftentimes to feed people.
Yeah, this is Fritz again. If I can interject, I've been Central and South America and Southeast Asia chasing these little things. And generally, like Bob said, they eat them for food, and that's about it. But also now with the ornamental industry, at least in Central and South America, and actually in Thailand too, they are getting money off these things to raise and sell to the trade.
I had people say a couple times to me that tropical fish are really pretty and native fish aren't. Well, you saw some pretty, I think, colorful fish. I've been to Peru twice. Believe me, the vast majority of fish are little silvery guys. They don't send those up to some tropical fish shop. They send the pretty ones up. We have color vision. We like color. Even I, as much as I'm interested in these, can get excited when that bright red fish comes up in the net. You know, so we've got as many color, well, those darters are among the most colorful freshwater fish on earth. And you go down south and there's lots and lots of kinds of darters. Any other questions? Say something?
Yeah, Bob, how many different fish, like you had that rock with all the eggs and you put it in the aquarium and of course the male guarded it. How many different fish have you actually hatched? You know, I mean, had eggs hatch?
Over 100. About half of those were native fish, half of them were tropical fish. Okay. Yeah, so over 100. I still, when I've got fish eggs in the basement, I'm going down and putting them under a microscope regular. A lot of fish eggs hatch amazingly in 48 hours from fertilized. That's from a single cell to a swimming fish in 48 hours. Wow. But they're actually hatching premature. They don't even have a mouth that can eat yet. But you're a moving egg now, because a snail can catch an egg. Some of the fish, the little fish, the darters especially, take 10 or 12 days to hatch. And when they hatch out, they got a working mouth, they got rays in their fins, they're much more developed. So it's like, okay, this guy is real premature in its development, but it can move. And this guy, you know, took a lot longer, but it's in better shape when it hatches out. So cool things like that. But on those ones in 48 hours, you could, like, every time a commercial came on television, run downstairs, look under the microscope, and it's changed. It's just sort of still fascinates me to watch that. Anybody else?
We've got a couple more questions in the chat.
Okay.
Are there sea lamprey in the Rouge?
No. Lamprey actually need really clean water. We have native lamprey. They only get about the size of a pencil, and everybody evolved with them. They don't kill things like the sea lamprey did, but they're a sign of quality water. So the sea lamprey would probably never be in the Rouge just because it just isn't the place that they could handle the water. Yeah, and using the lamprey side to kill them will be something that has to go on forever. We'll never get rid of them. We control them.
And there's another question here. Is there any way to get rid of the invasive species like the goby?
I wish there was. I'm personally responsible for killing about 5,000 gobies. And we do it somewhat humanely because I like fish, right? But I look at those gobies and they didn't do anything wrong. We brought them here, as an individual. But they really can be damaging. Although we saw them almost displace the Johnny darters in the Rouge, and we're not seeing that happen in cleaner rivers. So I think what happens is they're taking some of the habitat, but they can't live in some of the habitat the other darters live in. But anytime somebody comes in, and here's the danger. So even if you didn't destroy them, with that many gobies, they're the third most common fish in the Rouge today. There's only so much energy in that river. And now the gobies are utilizing that energy. That means every other species had some amount of loss. It might be so small we can't see it. But if there's only so much food and another 50 come in, then there's less food for everybody else, you know, so that's, you know, the real threat with anything invasive is, and you can't necessarily ever truly figure out the total impact that something has.
Then Sandy wants to know, seeing that darters are your favorite group of fish, is that why you named your cat Darter?
Yes, the previous cat was named Mouse, and I decided that this cat needed to be named after a fish, and Darter is a good name for him. He is still a quick mover. But yeah, so I have a cat named after a fish.
I think that's all the questions. Do we have
Okay.
any more from the floor? Thanks, Bob. That was great.
Okay,
Great presentation.
and thank you guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope I taught you a little bit. There's a whole lot more. But anytime I get a chance to talk about little fish, I'm going to be doing it. Okay.
All right,
Don,
man.